Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, Senator James Paterson, thank you very much for your time. Now, you're the only non-minister as a Member of Parliament who regularly receives these high-level security briefings. Has the intelligence you're now privy to shocked you?
Kieran, I wouldn't say that I've been shocked by anything that I've learned, and of course I can't go into the classified briefings that I've received, but it is very sobering. Australia is operating in a very changed geopolitical environment, and unfortunately there are a lot of threats to the safety and security of Australians. Not just our lives, but our way of life is under threat from a range of different actors.
I interviewed the Director General of Security, the head of ASIO, Mike Burgess, who told me last week that the threat from espionage and foreign interference could well, in years to come, in the not too distant future, overtake terrorism as the greatest challenge that ASIO faces. Are we equipped as a nation to deal with that threat?
Yes, I watched that interview quite closely, Kieran, as you'd imagine, and I take the Director General's warning on that very seriously, because his predecessors like David Irvine has publicly said that the threat of espionage already today in Australia is greater than any time, even higher than it was during the Cold War. So it's very sobering indeed to consider that it could get even worse and surpass terrorism as our threat. I think we are well equipped. Our agencies are incredibly well resourced, better resourced than they ever have been, and they have more powers, more extensive powers than they ever have been, and those powers have passed through the PJCIS with careful scrutiny. But we're always mindful of any further requests for resources or powers that the agencies need. If they're able to make the case that they need more powers, then we will scrutinise that closely and agree to them with appropriate safeguards.
Well, there's currently one bill before the PJCIS, your committee, and to be quite frank, I was surprised that the AFP and other investigators don't already have some sort of capacity like this. This is the Identify and Disrupt Bill, which is an amendment to the Surveillance Act. As I say, I was surprised that investigators don't already have the power to take an alleged perpetrator's computer and their online account.
It is surprising, Kieran, because currently what the AFP relies on is the agreement of alleged perpetrators to take control over their account. And if the perpetrator refuses, and they sometimes do, then that can stop cold an AFP investigation into a child exploitation ring, a drug trafficking ring, even a terrorism ring, and that is very concerning. And these new powers have been sought by the AFP and by government in recognition that the dark web is posing an increasing threat to the way of life of Australians, and also the ability of the AFP to track down criminals, because the dark web anonymises and helps protect the identity of people who engage in this kind of crime, and it's incredibly painstaking work to break into that without these sorts of powers.
And we should point out as well that the AFP, in an instance like we're looking at here and your committee's looking at, would require a magistrate's authorisation first before they are to get a warrant to then take over an alleged perpetrator's computer. So they don't just go in and, for those who are worried about the privacy implications, a magistrate's authorisation would be required. So in that context, do you think that that will placate those parliamentary colleagues of yours that might say, what about the privacy implications?
Kieran, that's right. Privacy concerns have been raised about these powers because they would be quite cutting-edge powers. They would essentially allow the AFP to do domestically what some of our agencies do internationally outside of our borders, and some Australians are reticent about granting those kind of powers to security agencies. They should be reassured, though, that if these powers were to pass the committee and the parliament, it would be with robust safeguards. Some safeguards have already been proposed, such as you say, a warrant required from a judicial officer or a member of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, but it's open to the committee to recommend even stronger safeguards if necessary to reassure members of parliament and the community that cutting-edge powers would come with cutting-edge oversight mechanisms to ensure that they are never misused or abused.
Yeah, well, given some of the atrocities that the AFP has to monitor, you can see why they want that additional power. Hard to see how a major political party, if there are safeguards, would oppose that. Now, the PJCIS is this year, as I understand it, also looking into conducting an inquiry into ideological motivated extremism. Why do you think we're seeing this growth in ideologically motivated extremism as opposed to religiously motivated extremism as a percentage of the caseload that our authorities are dealing with? It seems to be growing. Why is that?
What we've seen over the last 12 months, Kieran, is some long-term trends around disillusionment with globalisation and democracy and liberalism, intersecting with some sharper short-term trends like COVID-19, where people have been becoming increasingly isolated from their communities and their families and their workplaces simply due to the health measures put in place to fight the pandemic. So people who might have been radicalised more slowly online by accessing extreme content and material have been radicalised much more quickly by spending much more time online, and they haven't had the normal interaction with the rest of society, which can help be a bit of a circuit breaker in that process. It can bring them back to normal. And so ASIO is very concerned about the increasing workload they are now having to devote to ideological extremism in a range of different forms, some of it which fits the definition of extreme right-wing content, some of which doesn't fit any proper definition, but all of which is ideologically motivated. Alongside that, though, ASIO does say very clearly that the principal threat to the safety of Australians remains religiously motivated extremism, and within that, particularly Sunni Islamist extremism, which is the greatest threat to our life and liberty.
When you look at the security risks affecting the higher education and research sectors, do policymakers, do your committee members also need to be careful not to adversely impact successful and otherwise harmless international collaboration?
Absolutely, Kieran. I'm very mindful of that. International research collaboration is at the heart of a thriving higher education sector, and the committee and the parliament and the government does not want to do anything that would jeopardise that. Having said that, I think the record shows in recent years that not all of our universities have managed these risks well. That's one of the reasons why universities were included in the Foreign Relations Bill, giving the Foreign Minister the power to cancel international agreements. It's why the Universities Foreign Interference Task Force was established, and it's why this inquiry has been called for the committee to look into these issues, because while some universities have very robust measures for dealing with, for example, talent recruitment programs to make sure that their academics seek approval from their university before they enter into them, some of them had no visibility at all about what their academics were participating in. And I think that is a real reason for concern in this new geopolitical environment where other foreign states are trying to take advantage of our intellectual property and our research for their own purposes.
And finally, given the importance of your role now as the chair of this very powerful committee, is it time to give up the wolverine theatrics that you're a part of with other members of parliament?
Kieran, the Wolverines was established for a very good purpose, which is to undergird the bipartisan support for a strong Australian foreign policy that stands up for our national interest and our values. I think it's really important that we work across the aisle with like-minded Labor colleagues on these things. The Wolverines really, though, has morphed into a more global body, the International Parliamentary Alliance on China, which now includes 20 parliaments from all around the world as members, and a requirement of membership is that a centre-left and centre-right politician in each country be willing to serve as co-chairs. I'm the Australian co-chair of IPAC, along with Senator Kimberley Kitching from Labor, and we work really closely with our international counterparts from all around the world, from Asia to Europe to North America, on joint statements of support, of solidarity when any of our countries are individually targeted or singled out. And I think that that's a really important mechanism to support the government's efforts to work with other like-minded democracies to stand up to this rising authoritarianism, particularly from the Chinese Communist Party.
So no end to the Wolverines?
I think that it'll continue in an appropriate form.
Senator Paterson, I appreciate your time, new chair of the PJCIS. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kieran.